I never thought I'd be the kind of person who had a story worth telling anonymously on the internet. I was just a regular guy from Cleveland who moved to Austin for a tech job that paid too much and demanded too little of my soul. I lived in a decent apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the chaotic symphony of South Congress Avenue. It was the kind of place that looked expensive on Instagram but felt hollow in real life. I filled the silence with noise, with work, with the constant hum of my refrigerator, and with the sporadic company of friends who were more like acquaintances I'd known for a decade. My life was a series of well-lit rooms and empty corners, and I was okay with that because I had convinced myself that being lonely was just a stage of being successful. That's when Mark came back into my life. We had been best friends since college, the kind of friendship forged in the fires of cheap beer and shared existential dread during finals week. He was the guy who would drive 30 miles to pick me up when my car broke down at 2 a.m. I was the guy who lent him rent money when he was short, which was often. After graduation, we drifted apart geographically, but always stayed tethered by long phone calls and the occasional holiday visit. He stayed in Ohio, bouncing between sales jobs and relationships that never quite stuck. I moved south, chasing the sun and a better paycheck. We were the kind of friends who could go months without talking and pick up right where we left off. 3 months ago, he called me in a panic. His girlfriend of 2 years had kicked him out. He wouldn't tell me exactly why, just that it was complicated and she was crazy. He was sleeping in his car, which was a beat-up Toyota with a cracked windshield and a muffler that sounded like a dying animal. I didn't hesitate. I told him to come down to Austin, crash on my couch for a few weeks, get back on his feet. It felt like the right thing to do. It felt like the kind of friend I wanted to be. I had the space, I had the resources, and honestly, I was lonely enough that the idea of having a familiar face around the apartment was more of a comfort than an inconvenience. The first few weeks were exactly what I expected. We stayed up late playing video games, drinking whiskey, and reminiscing about the stupid things we did in our early 20s. He was messy, leaving dirty socks on the coffee table and using my expensive face wash to clean his armpits, but it was a small price to pay for the companionship. He got a job at a local sports bar, nothing fancy, but it gave him cash and a reason to leave the apartment. He started dating again, or at least trying to, and I would listen to his stories over breakfast about the women he met online. It was like we were 19 again, except we had wrinkles and better whiskey. He always talked about this one girl he met at the bar. A regular, he said. He was vague about the details, which I thought was just his way of keeping his personal life close to his chest. He said she was smart, beautiful, and way out of his league. He was smitten, and I was genuinely happy for him. I told him to go for it. I told him to stop self-sabotaging and just see where it went. I was so supportive. I was such a good friend. I had no idea that I was cheering him on to ruin my entire life. I started traveling more for work. A week here, a few days there. It was the nature of my position, managing accounts across the Southwest. When I was gone, I told Mark to make himself at home. I gave him my spare key, told him he could have friends over, just not to throw a rager and get me evicted. He laughed and said he was too old for that. I trusted him implicitly. He was my best friend. The idea of him betraying me wasn't just unlikely, it was physically impossible in my mind. That was the naivety that would come back to haunt me. It started with small things I didn't notice until they formed a pattern. Clothes in the laundry that weren't mine. A particular scent in the air when I came home from a long trip, a flowery perfume that clashed with the sandalwood and leather of my own cologne. I asked him if he had a girl over, and he just shrugged and said, "Yeah, man, I told you I was seeing someone." I didn't pry. I figured if he wanted me to meet her, he'd introduce her. I was too wrapped up in my own world, in my own pursuit of a promotion and the next big deal, to pay close attention to the subtle shifts happening in my own home. One Tuesday, I had a crucial meeting in Houston. It was supposed to last all day, but the client canceled an hour before. I was already in my car on the highway, halfway there, when I got the call. Frustrated, I turned around and headed back to Austin. It was early afternoon, a time when I was usually 1,000 miles away in a conference room. I didn't call Mark to tell him I was coming home early because it didn't seem necessary. It was my apartment. I was the one who paid the mortgage on it. I didn't need to announce my arrival. I remember the drive back vividly. The sun was bright, the sky was that perfect Texas blue, and I was listening to a podcast about the fall of the Roman Empire. I was in a decent mood, thinking about taking the rest of the day off, maybe hitting the gym, maybe grabbing a beer with Mark if he was awake. I had no sense of impending doom. There was no ominous music playing in my head. It was just another ordinary day that was about to become the day I would measure all other days against. I parked in my usual spot in the underground garage and took the elevator up. The hallway was quiet. I fumbled with my keys, juggling my laptop bag and a coffee cup I hadn't finished. When I unlocked the door, I heard music playing softly from the living room. Some indie folk band I didn't recognize. I smiled to myself. Mark was awake. Maybe we could do lunch. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the entrance and kicked off my shoes. I was about to call out his name when I heard her laugh. It was a low, familiar, melodic laugh that sent a shockwave straight through my chest. It was a laugh I knew better than my own. It was a laugh I had heard 1,000 times in the back of a car on a rainy night. It was the laugh of my girlfriend, Chloe. And then I heard his voice. God, you're so hot when you're just lounging around. You have no idea what you do to me. I froze. My mind went blank, a frantic white noise replacing all rational thought. I crept forward, my feet silent on the hardwood floor. I was a ghost in my own home. I peered around the corner of the hallway that led into the open-plan living room and kitchen. And there they were. Chloe was sprawled on my couch, the one I'd bought from a fancy mid-century modern store, wearing nothing but one of my old college t-shirts. Her legs were bare, her hair was a mess, and she had that contented, lazy smile on her face that I used to think was reserved for me after a lazy Sunday morning. Mark was on the floor, leaning against the couch, looking up at her with a dopey, adoring expression that made me want to vomit. He was shirtless, his hand resting casually on her knee, stroking her skin with a familiarity that spoke of weeks, not days. They didn't see me. I was a shadow in the hallway, watching my life implode in slow motion. It wasn't a kiss or a passionate embrace that broke me. It was the mundane intimacy of it. It was the way she handed him a piece of popcorn from the bowl she was holding, the way he bit her finger playfully, the way they laughed at something on the TV I couldn't see. They looked like a couple. A comfortable, settled, happy couple. They looked like they belonged there. They looked like they belonged together. And the worst part, the part that made my stomach drop out from under me, was the realization that Mark wasn't just some random guy Chloe had met. He was my best friend. And Chloe wasn't just some random girl Mark had met at the bar. She was my girlfriend. The betrayal wasn't just double. It was a geometric explosion of trust and love that left me breathless. It wasn't just cheating. It was an invasion. They had been using my home, my couch, my t-shirt to build their secret world right under my nose. For a solid minute I just stood there, my mouth dry, my heart pounding against my ribs so hard I was sure they could hear it. I was paralyzed by the sheer audacity of it. How long had this been going on? The clothes in the laundry, the weird perfume, the nights I was away on business. It all came flooding back. The stupid jokes he told about dating a regular. The vague references. He had been talking about her, my Chloe. He had been bragging about sleeping with my girlfriend, and I had been high-fiving him like a fool. Then the anger started to bubble up. It was a cold, sharp anger that cut through the shock. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time drunken accident. This was a calculated, continuous, and cruel deception. They had to have planned this. They had to have coordinated their schedules around my absences. Every time I called Chloe to say goodnight from a hotel room, was she lying in my bed, in my apartment, with my best friend? Every time I texted Mark to ask how his day was he responding from my living room with my girlfriend's head on his chest? I wanted to scream. I wanted to charge in there and throw a chair through my 50-inch TV. I wanted to break things, to make them feel a fraction of the devastation that was curdling in my veins. But I couldn't move. I was trapped in that hallway, watching the scene play out like a movie I couldn't turn off. My life, my home, my love, my friendship, all of it was a lie. Finally, I took a step back. My foot hit the leg of a small table by the door and the vase on top wobbled. It didn't fall, but it made a sound. A small, insignificant clatter, but in the quiet of that afternoon it was enough. The laughing stopped. They both turned their heads toward the hallway. Mark's face went pale. It was a ghostly, ashen white that made him look like he'd seen a corpse. His eyes went wide with a terror I had never seen in him before. Chloe's expression was different. She looked startled for a split second, but then it shifted. She looked almost annoyed, as if I had interrupted a private party I wasn't invited to, as if I was the intruder in my own home. That look, that flicker of annoyance, was the knife that twisted the deepest. They had gotten so comfortable in their deception that my presence was an inconvenience. I stepped out of the shadows. I looked at them, then at the TV, then at the remnants of their popcorn lunch. The silence was suffocating. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My voice was gone, stolen by the sheer weight of the betrayal. Mark scrambled to his feet, fumbling for his shirt. "Mason, bro. Listen, it's not what it looks like." I held up a hand to stop him. I couldn't listen to the lies. I looked past him at Chloe, who was pulling the hem of my t-shirt down to cover herself. "Chloe," I said, my voice was a hoarse whisper, "I thought you had a conference in Dallas." She just stared at me, a strange, defiant look in her eyes. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "I came back early," she said flatly, "and you're not supposed to be home either." And that's when I knew. This wasn't just a fling. This was an affair they had built their lives around. They had been living a double life in my home, waiting for me to leave so they could play house. And I was just the landlord who paid the bills. The silence that followed her words was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It wasn't just quiet. It was an absence of sound so complete that it felt like the world had stopped spinning just to watch me fall apart. Chloe's defiance hung in the air like smoke, and Mark stood there frozen, his shirt half on, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I kept looking at her, trying to find the woman I loved in that stranger's face. The woman who held my hand when I got the flu, who surprised me with tickets to my favorite band, who told me she loved me just that morning over a rushed phone call. That woman was gone. In her place was someone cold and calculating, someone who had been playing a game I didn't even know existed. I walked past them both, my legs moving on autopilot, and sat down in the armchair across from the couch. It was my favorite chair, the one I curled up in to read or watch the news. Sitting in it now felt like sitting in a crime scene. I was surrounded by evidence of their betrayal. The 2 coffee cups on the table, one with a faint lipstick stain. The throw blanket that was usually folded neatly on the back of the couch now crumpled on the floor. The smell of her perfume mixed with his cheap cologne, a cocktail that made me nauseous. I looked at Mark, then at Chloe, and I realized I didn't know either of them. Not really. The people I thought I knew were just ghosts I had invented to fill the empty spaces in my life. "Explain it to me," I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "I want to hear you say it out loud, both of you. I want to understand how this happened." Mark took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Mason, man, I swear to God it just happened. It wasn't planned. She came by to see you one day when you were out, and we just started talking, and one thing led to another, and—" "Don't," Chloe snapped, cutting him off. She stood up from the couch, pulling my t-shirt down as if she had any dignity left to protect. "Don't grovel, it's pathetic." I stared at her, genuinely stunned. "Pathetic? You're sitting in my apartment, wearing my clothes, sleeping with my best friend, and you have the nerve to call him pathetic." She crossed her arms and looked at me with something I can only describe as contempt. "You want the truth, Mason? Fine, here it is. You weren't here, you were never here. You were always working, always traveling, always too busy with your precious career to notice that I was drowning in loneliness. Do you know what it's like to be in love with someone who treats you like a piece of furniture? Someone who looks at you but never sees you?" I opened my mouth to argue, to defend myself, but she kept going, her voice rising with each word. "Mark was here, he saw me. He listened to me. He made me feel like I mattered, unlike you who only ever cared about your job and your stupid status. So don't you dare act like the victim here. You pushed me away long before he showed up." Her words hit me like physical blows. I wanted to scream at her that she was wrong, that I loved her, that I was working so hard for us, for our future. But the truth was, she wasn't entirely wrong. I had been absent. I had been distracted. I had convinced myself that providing for her was the same as loving her. And in that gap, Mark had slipped in and filled the void. That didn't make what they did right. It didn't excuse the lies and the deception, but it made it hurt even more because I couldn't just hate her blindly. I had to carry the weight of my own failure alongside the weight of her betrayal. I turned to Mark. "And you, what's your excuse? You're my brother, I took you in. I gave you a home, a job, a second chance, and this is how you repay me. He looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I know, man, I know, I'm sorry, I really am. I didn't mean for this to happen, it just, she was there and I was lonely and you were always gone and— Stop saying I was gone, I interrupted, my voice cracking. I was gone because I was paying for this apartment. I was gone because I was working my ass off to support a life that included you, both of you. I came home every chance I got. I called every day. I texted every night. What more did you want from me? Chloe laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. We wanted you to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. You think sending a text message is intimacy. You think coming home late and collapsing into bed is connection. Mark actually talked to me. He asked about my day and meant it. He held me when I cried. When did you ever do that, Mason? When was the last time you actually looked at me and saw me? I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because she was right. I had been so focused on building a future that I had forgotten to live in the present. I had treated our relationship like a project, something to be managed and optimized, rather than something to be nurtured and cherished. And in doing so, I had handed her over to someone else. I didn't give Mark permission to take her, but I had left the door wide open. The anger I felt started to shift, morphing into something darker and more destructive. It wasn't just anger at them anymore. It was anger at myself. At my own blindness, my own arrogance, my own stupidity. How could I have been so clueless? How could I have trusted so completely? The signs were all there, screaming at me, and I had ignored them because I didn't want to believe that the two people I trusted most in the world could hurt me like this. I stood up from the chair, unable to sit still any longer. I paced the room, running my hands through my hair, trying to process everything that was happening. My mind was racing, jumping from memory to memory, re-examining every interaction, every text, every phone call. It was like watching a movie of my life and realizing the twist ending was always there, hidden in plain sight. How long? I asked, stopping in front of them. How long has this been going on? Mark and Chloe exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them that made me sick to my stomach. Finally, Mark spoke. About 2 months, since right after I moved in. 2 months, 2 months of lies. 2 months of them sneaking around behind my back, using my home as their playground. 2 months of me coming home exhausted and grateful for their company, never suspecting that they were sharing secrets and bodies the moment I walked out the door. I thought back to all the times I had told Mark how much I loved Chloe, how lucky I was to have her. And he had just nodded along, probably laughing at me in his head. I looked at Chloe, who was still standing there with that defiant expression, and I felt something inside me break. Not the anger or the sadness, but the love. The love I had for her, the love I had carried for 3 years, it just dissolved. It was like a switch had been flipped, and suddenly I was looking at a stranger. A stranger who had once been everything to me but now meant nothing. It was a terrifying feeling, how quickly it all evaporated. I realized I didn't love her anymore. Maybe I hadn't loved her for a long time. Maybe I had just been going through the motions, comfortable with the routine, afraid of the unknown, and she had felt that. She had sensed the distance I refused to acknowledge. Get out, I said quietly. Both of you, get out of my apartment. Chloe's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Mason, don't be dramatic. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out what happens next. There is no next, I said, my voice rising. There's nothing to figure out. You made your choice, you chose him, so go be with him, go live your little fantasy life. But you're not doing it in my home, get your stuff and get out. Mark stepped forward, his hands outstretched. Come on, man, we can work this out, we can find a way to. Don't, I said, pointing a finger at him. Don't say another word, you don't get to ask for forgiveness. You don't get to try to fix this. You broke it. You both broke it, and you can't unbreak it. Mark opened his mouth again, but I cut him off with a look that must have been terrifying because he immediately shut it. He looked at Chloe, who shrugged and started gathering her things from the bedroom. I watched them pack up their belongings, watched them move around my apartment like they had every right to be there, and I felt nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. It was like watching strangers clear out a rental property. There was no connection, no emotion, just the quiet efficiency of people who had already checked out. When they were done, they stood by the door, bags in hand. Chloe looked back at me one last time, her eyes searching for something I wasn't willing to give. Mason, she said softly, I'm sorry, I really am. I never meant to hurt you. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. That's the thing, Chloe, you didn't care about hurting me. If you did, you would have stopped. You would have come to me. You would have given me a chance to fix things. But you didn't. You just went behind my back and convinced yourself it was my fault. So don't apologize to me, it doesn't mean anything. She nodded, her jaw tightening, and then she walked out the door. Mark followed her, pausing at the threshold to look back at me. He had tears in his eyes, and for a second I almost felt sorry for him. He had lost everything too. His best friend, his home, his sense of decency. But then I remembered the look on his face when he touched her knee, the casual intimacy of it, and any sympathy I had evaporated. "Goodbye, Mark," I said, and I closed the door. The moment the lock clicked, I collapsed against it, sliding down to the floor. The tears came then, hot and fast, streaming down my face as I sat in the silence of my apartment. The silence was deafening. The absence of their voices, their presence, their betrayal, left a void that threatened to swallow me whole. I sat there for hours, not moving, not thinking, just existing in a state of suspended animation. The sun set outside my windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and I watched it happen without really seeing it. Eventually, I got up and walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge and stared at the contents, but nothing appealed to me. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. I wasn't anything. I was just a shell, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good stuff I had been saving for a special occasion, and drank it in one gulp. The burn in my throat was the only thing that made me feel real. I thought about calling someone. My mom, maybe, or my brother. But what would I say? "Hey, my girlfriend and my best friend have been sleeping together in my apartment for 2 months, and I had no idea until I walked in on them today." How do you even start that conversation? How do you admit to someone that you're so clueless, so oblivious, that your entire life fell apart without you even noticing? The shame of it was almost worse than the pain. As the night wore on, I found myself wandering the apartment, touching things, trying to feel connected to something. I picked up the throw blanket from the floor and folded it, placing it back on the couch. I gathered the coffee cups and washed them, scrubbing them until they sparkled. I opened the windows to air out the smell of them, letting the cool Texas night breeze fill the space. I was erasing them, inch by inch, reclaiming my home for myself. But I couldn't erase them from my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Chloe laughing, Mark's hand on her knee. The way they looked at each other, so comfortable, so content. It was like a horror movie on a loop, playing behind my eyelids every time I blinked. I wondered if they were together right now. If they had gone to Mark's car, or to her apartment, or to some cheap motel to celebrate their freedom. The thought made me want to scream. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I lay down, I felt the ghost of Chloe in the bed, the phantom of Mark in the next room. So I sat in my armchair, the one I had been sitting in when my world collapsed, and I stared at the wall. I replayed every conversation, every moment, every sign I had missed, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. They had taken my girlfriend and my best friend, but they weren't going to take my dignity. I was going to survive this. I was going to move on. I was going to build a life that didn't include them, a life that was so full and so rich that their betrayal would become nothing more than a footnote. But first, I had to deal with the practicalities. The lease was in my name. The bills were in my name. Mark had been living here rent-free, but that was over now. Chloe had a key, but I changed the locks the next morning. I called a locksmith at 7 a.m., and he showed up at 8. I gave him a $100 tip to make sure he did a good job. I wasn't taking any chances. I packed up all of Mark's remaining things, the stuff he had left behind, and put them in garbage bags. I left them outside the front door with a note. "Your stuff is on the curb, don't come back." The next few days were a blur. I went to work, pretending everything was normal, but I was a ghost in my own body. My colleagues asked if I was okay, and I said I was tired, just tired. They bought it because they didn't care enough to dig deeper. That's the thing about life, I realized. Everyone is so wrapped up in their own world that they don't notice when yours is crumbling. You can walk around with a shattered heart and a broken soul, and people will just smile and wave, oblivious to the war you're fighting inside. I blocked both of them on my phone. I deleted their numbers, their texts, their photos. I unfollowed them on social media. I wanted to erase every trace of them from my existence, but it wasn't that simple. Because Chloe had been part of my life for 3 years and Mark for a decade. They were woven into the fabric of my history, and trying to tear them out left holes. Big, gaping holes that I didn't know how to fill. I thought about revenge. I thought about going to Mark's work and telling his boss what kind of person he was. I thought about posting on social media, exposing them for the world to see. I thought about showing up at Chloe's apartment and demanding answers. But what would that accomplish? It wouldn't undo what had been done. It wouldn't make me feel better. It would just drag me down to their level, and I was better than that. At least, I wanted to be. So I did the only thing I could do. I moved forward, one day at a time, one foot in front of the other. I went to the gym and worked out until my muscles screamed. I went to therapy and talked to a stranger about my feelings. I reconnected with old friends who weren't Mark, people who had been waiting for me to come back to them. And slowly, painfully, I started to heal. But the healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong, invincible, like I could conquer the world. Other days I was back on that floor, crying into the carpet, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I learned that grief doesn't have a timeline. It comes and goes like the tide, pulling you under when you least expect it. And I learned that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to hurt. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel broken, because that's what betrayal does, it breaks you. But it also gives you a choice. You can stay broken, or you can pick up the pieces and build something new. I chose to build something new. I chose to become a person who didn't need Chloe or Mark to be complete. I chose to become a person who could stand on his own, who could find happiness in solitude, who could trust again even after being burned. It wasn't easy. It took months of hard work, of sleepless nights, of tears and therapy and soul-searching, but I did it. And in the process, I discovered something I never expected. I discovered that I was stronger than I ever knew. The first month after I kicked them out was a haze of mechanical survival. I went to work, I came home, I stared at the walls, and I tried to remember how to breathe without the weight of betrayal crushing my chest. My apartment felt like a crime scene, every corner holding a memory I didn't want. I couldn't sit on the couch without seeing them. I couldn't walk into the kitchen without hearing Chloe's laugh. I couldn't even look at the armchair without feeling the phantom sting of that afternoon. So I did what any rational person would do. I threw myself into the one thing that had always made sense to me: work. I started taking on extra projects, volunteering for the assignments no one else wanted. I traveled more, spending weeks on the road, hopping from city to city like a man running from his own shadow. I told myself it was for the promotion, for the money, for the career I had sacrificed so much for. But the truth was simpler and sadder. I was running. I was running from the silence of my apartment, from the ghosts of my former life, from the crushing realization that the two people I trusted most had built their happiness on the ruins of mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. Chloe had accused me of being absent, of prioritizing work over her, and now I was doing exactly that. But it felt different now. Before, I had been working for us, for a future I thought we were building together. Now, I was working for myself. For the hollow satisfaction of a job well done, for the fleeting distraction of a conference call, for the small, meaningless victories that padded my resume but did nothing to fill the void in my chest. I avoided social media like the plague. I didn't want to see their faces, their updates, their carefully curated lives. I didn't want to know if they were together, if they were happy, if they had already moved on, like I was just a speed bump in their love story. Ignorance, I decided, was a form of self-preservation. If I didn't know, I couldn't hurt. So I buried my head in the sand and pretended they didn't exist. But the world has a cruel way of forcing you to confront what you're trying to escape. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after the breakup. I was in Houston for a conference, standing in the lobby of a hotel, waiting for an Uber to take me to the airport. The lobby was crowded with businessmen in suits and tourists with rolling suitcases, a blur of noise and motion that I had learned to tune out. I was scrolling through my emails, half listening to the ambient chatter, when I heard a voice that made my blood run cold. 3 months. That's how long we've been together. Can you believe it? I looked up and there she was, Chloe. She was standing at the check-in counter, her back to me, her hand intertwined with Mark's. They were checking into the hotel. The same hotel where I was staying. The same hotel where I was waiting for a ride to leave. It was like the universe had conspired to bring us together, to force me to witness their happiness up close. Mark was laughing, his arm draped around her shoulder, looking more relaxed and content than I had ever seen him. He was wearing a nice shirt, one I had never seen before, and he had gotten a haircut. He looked like he had stepped into a new life, a better life, while I was still bleeding out on the floor of my own existence. Chloe was radiant, her smile bright, her laugh light. She looked happy, really, truly happy, and that happiness was a knife to my gut. I should have looked away. I should have walked out the door and pretended I hadn't seen them. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, watching them like a train wreck I couldn't turn away from. They finished checking in and turned toward the elevators, and that's when Chloe saw me. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions. Surprise, then shock, then something that looked almost like guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of indifference that was somehow worse. Mark followed her gaze, and when he saw me, his face drained of color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. I suppose, in a way, he had. The lobby seemed to fall silent around us, the noise of the crowd fading into a distant hum. We stood there, the three of us, suspended in a moment of unbearable tension. I could see the gears turning in their heads, trying to figure out what to say, how to handle this. I could see the guilt in Mark's eyes, the defiance in Chloe's, and I could feel the anger rising in me, hot and sharp, threatening to spill out in ways I couldn't control. "Mason," Chloe said, her voice carefully neutral. "What a coincidence." "Coincidence," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yeah, that's one word for it." Mark stepped forward, his hands raised in that same placating gesture he had used the day I caught them. "Hey man, this is awkward, we didn't know you were going to be here." "That's the problem, isn't it?" I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You never know where I'm going to be, that's the only way this works. You have to avoid me like I'm a disease you're afraid of catching." Chloe rolled her eyes, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "Don't make this dramatic, Mason. We're just checking into a hotel. We didn't come here to find you." "But you found me," I said. "And here you are together, happy, just like you always wanted." Mark opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "Save it. I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear your apologies. I don't want to hear anything from either of you. You made your choice. You made it a long time ago. So go ahead, enjoy your little getaway. Live your perfect little life. But don't pretend like you care about how I feel." Chloe's face hardened, her mask of indifference cracking just enough to reveal the anger underneath. "You know what, Mason? We didn't do anything wrong. We fell in love. It happens. People fall out of love and into love with other people. It's not a crime." "It's not a crime," I repeated, my voice dripping with contempt. "But lying to me for 2 months, using my apartment, making me feel like an idiot for trusting you, that's not a crime, but it makes you a terrible person, both of you." Mark looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Chloe crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "We didn't set out to hurt you, it just happened." "Things don't just happen, Chloe," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. "People make choices. You made a choice. He made a choice. And I'm the one who paid for it. So don't stand there and tell me you didn't do anything wrong. You know you did, you just don't want to admit it." The elevator dinged, and a group of people spilled out, breaking the tension momentarily. Chloe grabbed Mark's hand and pulled him toward the elevator. "We're not doing this here, we're not doing this at all. Goodbye, Mason." They stepped into the elevator, and as the doors slid shut, I caught one last glimpse of their faces. Mark looked devastated, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Chloe looked determined, resolute, like she had already closed the book on this chapter of her life. And then they were gone, leaving me standing in the lobby, my heart pounding, my hands shaking, the ghost of their presence lingering in the air. I walked out of the hotel and into the Houston heat, the sun burning my skin, the noise of the city washing over me. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, winded and disoriented. Seeing them together, so happy, so unbothered by the wreckage they had left behind, was a pain I hadn't anticipated. I thought I had moved on. I thought I had healed. But seeing them like that, in the flesh, reminded me that I hadn't healed at all. I had just buried the pain so deep I couldn't feel it anymore. Until now. I canceled my Uber and walked to a bar a few blocks away. It was a dive, the kind of place where the drinks were cheap and the lighting was dim enough to hide your shame. I ordered a whiskey, the good stuff, and drank it slowly, letting the burn wash over me. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but I didn't have the energy. I just sat there, nursing my drink, replaying the encounter in my head. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. The worst part was the realization that I had been replaced so completely, so effortlessly, that they didn't even think twice about it. I was a footnote in their story, a minor inconvenience they had to navigate around. They had moved on, built a new life, found happiness, while I was still stuck in the wreckage, trying to piece together the fragments of who I used to be. I thought about all the things I could have done differently. I thought about the nights I had worked late, the trips I had taken, the texts I had ignored. I thought about all the times I had chosen my career over my relationship, convinced that the sacrifice was worth it. And I realized that Chloe was right about one thing: I had been absent. I had been so focused on building a future that I had neglected the present. I had taken her for granted, assumed she would always be there, and I had paid the price for my arrogance. But that didn't excuse what she had done. Nothing excused that. If she had been unhappy, she should have told me. She should have given me a chance to change, to fight for us. Instead, she had gone behind my back and built a new life with my best friend. She had robbed me of the opportunity to fix things, to grow, to be better. She had made the decision for both of us, and I would never forgive her for that. I finished my drink and ordered another. And another. By the time I stumbled out of the bar, the sun had set and the city had come alive with neon lights and the thrum of nightlife. I was drunk, not incapacitated, but drunk enough that the edges of my pain had softened into something more manageable. I walked back to the hotel, weaving through the crowds, and collapsed onto my bed without even taking off my shoes. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let their happiness destroy me. I was going to find a way to move on, to build a life that was so full and so rich that their betrayal would become nothing more than a distant memory. But first, I had to forgive myself. I had to let go of the guilt, the shame, the endless what-ifs. I had to accept that I had made mistakes, that I had been flawed and imperfect, but that didn't mean I deserved what they had done to me. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover and a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I called my therapist and scheduled an appointment for the next day. I started journaling, writing down all the things I couldn't say out loud. I started going to the gym again, not just to stay in shape, but to remind myself that I was strong, that I could endure. And I started saying yes to things I would have said no to before. Dinner with coworkers, drinks with old friends, weekend trips to places I had never been. I was determined to rebuild my life, brick by brick, and I wasn't going to let anyone stop me. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It started with a text message. A number I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made me open it. "Hey Mason, this is Sarah, Mark's sister. I know we haven't talked in a while, but I need to tell you something. I think you deserve to know the truth." My heart started racing. Sarah and I had been close once, back when Mark and I were inseparable. She was like a sister to me, and I had always liked her. But after everything that happened, I had cut off all contact with Mark's family. It was too painful to be reminded of what I had lost. I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to protect myself from whatever new pain she was about to deliver, but part of me needed to know. I needed to understand why Mark had done what he did, why Chloe had chosen him, why my life had fallen apart so spectacularly. I typed back, "What truth?" She responded almost immediately. "It's about Chloe and Mark. There's more to the story than you know. Can we meet? I'll explain everything." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Where and when?" We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Austin the next day. I showed up early, nervous and anxious, not sure what to expect. Sarah was already there, sitting at a table in the corner, a cup of tea in front of her. She looked older than I remembered, the years of stress and disappointment etched into her face. But when she saw me, she smiled, and for a moment it was like nothing had changed. "Hey Mason," she said, standing up to hug me. "Thanks for coming." I hugged her back, feeling the warmth of her embrace, and for a second I let myself believe that everything was going to be okay. Then she pulled back and looked me in the eyes, and I saw the seriousness in her expression. "There's something you need to know about Mark," she said. "About why he really came to Austin. It wasn't just because Chloe kicked him out. It was because of something else, something he's been hiding from everyone." I sat down, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about?" Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around her mug. "Mark had a gambling problem," she said quietly. "A bad one. He owed money to some dangerous people. He came to Austin to get away from them, to start over. But he didn't. He started gambling again. And when Chloe found out, she didn't kick him out because he was a loser. She kicked him out because he stole from her thousands of dollars. And he promised her he would stop, but he didn't. He came to you because he needed a place to hide, and he used Chloe as an excuse. I stared at her, my mind reeling. What does this have to do with Chloe, with the affair? Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with a pity that made my stomach turn. Mason, I don't think Mark planned to get involved with Chloe, but I also don't think he was honest with her about why he was really there. And I think Chloe found out the truth. I think she found out about the gambling, about the money, about everything. And I think that's why she did what she did. I shook my head, trying to process what she was saying. I don't understand. What are you telling me? Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. I'm telling you that Mark has been lying to everyone, including Chloe, and I'm telling you that the affair might not have been what it seemed. Chloe found out about the gambling a few weeks ago. I don't know all the details, but I know they had a huge fight. And I know she reached out to me, asking questions about Mark's past. She was trying to figure out if she could trust him. I sat back, my head spinning. If Sarah was telling the truth, then Chloe had discovered Mark's secret. She had found out that he had lied to her, manipulated her, used her, and she had decided to stay with him anyway. Despite knowing the truth, despite knowing what kind of man he really was, she had chosen him over me. But there was something else, something that nagged at me. If Chloe had known about the gambling, why hadn't she come to me? Why hadn't she told me? Why had she chosen to stay with Mark instead of coming clean? I looked at Sarah, my voice barely a whisper. Does Chloe know that you told me this? She shook her head. No, she doesn't know I'm here. But I thought you deserved to know. I thought you deserved to understand what happened. I thanked Sarah and walked out of the coffee shop, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and anger. The new information didn't change anything. It didn't undo the betrayal. But it painted a more complicated picture, one where Mark was even more of a villain and Chloe was either a victim or a willing accomplice. I didn't know which was worse. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights and obsessive research. I started digging into Mark's past, calling old friends, piecing together the timeline of his lies. I found out that his gambling debts were worse than Sarah had implied. He owed money to loan sharks, people who didn't take kindly to being stiffed. He had skipped town not just to get away from Chloe, but to get away from them. And he had brought that danger to my doorstep, to my home, without a second thought about the consequences. One night I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Is this Mason? A gruff voice asked. Who's asking? Let's just say I'm a friend of Mark's, a business associate, and I think we need to have a conversation about the money he owes me. My blood ran cold. I don't know anything about that. I haven't talked to Mark in months. I know you haven't, the voice said, but I also know you were the one he was staying with, and I know he might have told you things that could help me find him. I don't know where he is, I said, my voice shaking. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the voice laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound that sent chills down my spine. You know what, Mason? I believe you, but here's the thing. Mark ran out on me and I don't like being run out on, so I'm going to give you a choice. You can help me find him or you can deal with the consequences yourself, it's up to you. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my apartment, the phone pressed to my ear, my heart pounding in my chest. I had thought the betrayal was the worst thing that could happen to me. I had thought losing Chloe and Mark was the bottom. But now I realized I was just getting started. The nightmare was far from over. I sat down on my couch, my hands trembling, and I realized that I had two choices. I could give in to the fear, let it consume me, let it destroy everything I had rebuilt, or I could fight back. I could take control of the situation, protect myself, and maybe, just maybe, get the answers I had been looking for. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever find closure or if the pain would ever fully fade. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let Mark's mistakes or Chloe's betrayal or the loan shark's threats define me. I was going to survive. I was going to thrive. And I was going to make damn sure that no one ever had the power to destroy me like this again. The week after that phone call was the longest of my life. Every noise made me jump. Every unfamiliar car on my street made my heart race. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat I couldn't see. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I stopped doing anything that resembled normal living because I was too busy looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The loan shark had my number, and that meant he could find me whenever he wanted. I knew the playbook. I had seen enough movies, read enough true crime, to understand that guys like him didn't just make idle threats. They followed through. And the only thing standing between him and his money was my ex-best friend who had already proven he had no loyalty to anyone but himself. I thought about going to the police. I even picked up the phone a few times, dialed the non-emergency number, and hung up before anyone answered. What was I going to tell them? That a man I'd never met threatened me over the phone about a debt I didn't owe. They'd laugh me out of the station. They'd tell me to change my number and get a security system, which I did, but it didn't make me feel any safer. The fear had burrowed into my bones, a cold, persistent dread that followed me everywhere. I started carrying pepper spray. I started varying my route home from work. I started checking the back seat of my car before I got in. I was living like a fugitive in my own life, and the worst part was that I hadn't done anything wrong. The irony was brutal. Mark had brought this danger into my life, and he had done it without a second thought. He had used my home as a hideout, my friendship as a shield, and my trust as a weapon. And when the walls started closing in, he had simply disappeared, leaving me to deal with the fallout. I wondered if he even knew what he had done. I wondered if he was out there somewhere, living his best life, oblivious to the fact that I was drowning in the mess he had made. Or maybe he did know and he just didn't care. That was the harder pill to swallow. I started digging again. I called everyone I knew who might have information about Mark's whereabouts. I reached out to his old coworkers, his college friends, even his ex-girlfriends. I hated myself for it. I hated that I was still tangled up in his drama, still chasing the ghost of a man who had destroyed me. But I couldn't stop. I needed to find him. Not for the loan shark, not for closure, but for my own survival. Because as long as Mark was out there, running, hiding, I was a target. And I refused to be a target anymore. One night, about 2 weeks after the phone call, I got a break. An old friend of Mark's from Cleveland called me back. He had heard I was asking questions, and he had something to tell me. We met at a bar on the east side, a place so dimly lit and anonymous that I felt like I was in a spy movie. He was a nervous guy, twitchy and paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder as if he expected someone to jump out of the shadows. He told me that Mark had been in touch with him a few weeks ago, asking for money. He told me that Mark was staying with a cousin in Dallas, trying to lay low until the heat died down. He told me that Mark was scared, really scared, and that he was planning to leave the country. Leave the country? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Where is he going? The guy shrugged, taking a long pull from his beer. He didn't say. Just said he needed to get out, start over somewhere nobody knew him. He sounded desperate, man. Like he knew the walls were closing in. I left the bar with a new sense of purpose. Mark was in Dallas, and he was planning to run. If I wanted answers, if I wanted to protect myself, I had to find him before he disappeared for good. I drove home that night with my mind racing, making plans, weighing options. I knew it was risky. I knew I might be walking into a trap, but I didn't care. I had to face him. I had to look him in the eye and make him understand what he had done to me. And if that meant driving to Dallas and confronting him myself, so be it. The next morning, I called in sick to work and packed a bag. I told myself it was just a day trip, a few hours there and back, nothing more. But as I got into my car and started the engine, I knew I was lying to myself. This wasn't just a trip. This was a reckoning. And I wasn't coming back until I had the closure I needed. The drive to Dallas was long and quiet. I put on music, but I couldn't focus on it. I tried to think about what I was going to say, how I was going to handle the confrontation, but my mind kept drifting to darker places. I thought about all the years of friendship, all the memories, all the moments that had led us to this point. I thought about the way Mark used to make me laugh, the way he had my back when we were younger, the way I had always thought of him as a brother. And then I thought about the way he had betrayed me, the way he had lied to me, the way he had used me and discarded me like I was nothing. The anger that had been simmering inside me for months finally boiled over, hot and fierce, and I let it. I let it fuel me, drive me, push me forward. I found the cousin's house in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of Dallas. It was a small, sad-looking place with peeling paint and a yard full of weeds. I parked across the street and sat in my car for a long time, just watching. I didn't know what I was expecting. A dramatic confrontation, a tearful apology, a fight. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I knew I couldn't sit there forever. So I got out of the car, walked up to the front door and knocked. The door opened and there he was, Mark. He looked terrible. His face was gaunt, his eyes were hollow, and he had a nervous energy about him that made him seem smaller than I remembered. He stared at me for a long moment, his mouth open, his eyes wide with shock. "Mason," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I pushed past him into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to talk, and this time you're going to tell me the truth, all of it." He followed me into the living room, his hands shaking, his face pale. "How did you find me?" "It doesn't matter how I found you," I said, turning to face him. "What matters is that you've been lying to me from the very beginning. The gambling, the debt, the loan sharks. You brought all of that into my life, and you didn't even have the decency to warn me." Mark's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he was going to cry. I know I messed up. I was just so scared, man. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I could just get away, start over, everything would be fine. Everything would be fine. I repeated, my voice rising. "You ruined my life, you slept with my girlfriend, you used my home, you put me in danger, and you didn't even care. You just ran away and left me to deal with the mess you made." He sat down on the couch, his head in his hands. I know what I did, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mason. I never meant to hurt you. I was just so lost, so desperate, and I didn't know how to ask for help." I wanted to scream at him, to hit him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I had felt. But as I looked at him, broken and defeated, I realized that he was already suffering. He had lost everything. His girlfriend, his home, his friends, his dignity. He was a shell of the person he used to be, and no amount of anger from me could make it worse. "I know about Chloe," I said, my voice flat. "I know she found out about the gambling. I know you lied to her too." He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "She left me. A few weeks ago, she said she couldn't trust me, couldn't be with someone who lied to her. She was right. I lied to everyone. I lied to you, I lied to her, I lied to myself. I thought if I could just pretend everything was fine, it would be." I sat down across from him, my anger fading into something more complicated. "Where is she now?" He shrugged. "I don't know. She moved out, changed her number. I haven't heard from her since. I guess she's trying to start over too." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with all the things we couldn't say. I thought about Chloe, about the woman I had loved, about the woman who had betrayed me. I thought about how she had been just as much a victim of Mark's lies as I had been. She had fallen for his charm, his vulnerability, his promises of a better life. And when she found out the truth, she had walked away. Just like that. No drama, no closure, just a quiet exit. I realized then that I had been looking at this all wrong. I had been so focused on Mark, on Chloe, on the betrayal, that I had forgotten to look at myself. I had been so busy playing the victim that I hadn't stopped to consider my own role in the disaster. Chloe had been right about one thing. I had been absent. I had been so focused on my career, on my future, on my own ambitions, that I had neglected the people who mattered most. I had pushed her away long before Mark showed up, and I had been too stubborn to see it. But that didn't make what they did right. It didn't make the lies okay. It just made it more complicated. "Did you love her?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "I thought I did, but I don't think I know what love is anymore. I don't think I've ever really loved anyone, not the way you loved her, not the way you loved me." I nodded, processing his words. "What are you going to do now?" He laughed bitterly. "Run. It's what I'm good at. I have a ticket to Mexico next week. I'm going to disappear, start over somewhere nobody knows me. It's probably for the best." "You can't run forever," I said. "Eventually you have to face what you've done." "I know," he said, "but I'm not ready yet. Maybe someday I will be, but not today." I stood up, ready to leave. I had gotten what I came for. I had faced him, heard his truth, and seen the wreckage of his life. It wasn't the closure I had expected, but it was closure nonetheless. "Mason," he said, stopping me at the door. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry for everything." I looked back at him, this man who had once been my brother, and I felt a strange sense of peace. "I know you are, and maybe someday I'll be able to forgive you, but not today. Today I'm just trying to survive." I walked out of the house and got back into my car. The drive home was long and contemplative. I thought about everything that had happened, everything I had lost, everything I had learned. I thought about Chloe, about Mark, about the future I had imagined and the future I now had to build. I thought about the lone shark, the threats, the fear that had consumed me, and I made a decision. When I got home, I called the police. Not to report the threats, but to talk to someone about my options. I told them everything. About Mark, about the gambling, about the lone shark. They listened, took notes, and told me they would look into it. I didn't know if anything would come of it, but it felt good to finally be honest, to finally stop carrying the weight of Mark's secrets. A few weeks later, I got a call from the police. They had arrested the lone shark on unrelated charges. He was facing a lengthy prison sentence, and he wasn't going to be bothering anyone anytime soon. The relief I felt was overwhelming, a weight lifting off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I could finally breathe. I could finally start to move on. I started therapy again, this time with a different therapist, one who specialized in trauma and betrayal. I talked about everything. The affair, the gambling, the threats, the fear. I talked about my own failures, my own blindness, my own role in the disaster. And slowly, painfully, I started to heal. It wasn't linear and it wasn't easy. Some days I felt like I was back at square one, drowning in the same pain I thought I had escaped. But other days I felt stronger, more resilient, more capable of facing whatever life threw at me. I started dating again. Nothing serious, just casual dinners and coffee dates. I met some wonderful women, women who made me laugh and forget about the past. But I wasn't ready for anything more. I had been burned so badly that I didn't trust myself to make good choices. I was afraid of repeating the same mistakes, of falling for the wrong person, of getting hurt again. But eventually I met someone. Her name was Emma. She was a graphic designer, quiet and thoughtful, with a smile that made my heart skip a beat. We met at a mutual friend's party, and we hit it off immediately. She was everything Chloe wasn't. Honest, straightforward, unafraid to tell me when I was being an idiot. She didn't have a dramatic backstory or hidden secrets. She was just a normal person, looking for a normal life, and I found myself falling for her faster than I ever thought possible. We took it slow. Months of dating before we even talked about moving in together. I wanted to be sure, really sure, that I wasn't repeating the same pattern. I wanted to make sure that I was ready, that I had healed enough to be the partner she deserved. And she was patient. She waited, she supported me, and she never once made me feel like I was broken. A year after I kicked Mark and Chloe out of my life, I proposed to Emma. We were on a beach in California, watching the sunset, and I got down on one knee and asked her to be my wife. She said yes, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I had found something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. I never saw Mark again. I heard through the grapevine that he had moved to South America, started a new life, maybe even found some version of happiness. I didn't wish him ill, but I didn't wish him well either. I just didn't think about him anymore. He was a chapter in my life that was closed, a lesson I had learned the hard way. And Chloe, I ran into her once, about 2 years after everything happened. We were both at a grocery store, reaching for the same carton of milk. She looked older, tired, but happy in a way she hadn't been when we were together. We made small talk, awkward and stilted, and then she said something that stayed with me. "I'm sorry for what I did," she said. "I was in a bad place and I took it out on you. You didn't deserve that." I nodded, accepting her apology. "I wasn't perfect either. I wasn't there for you when you needed me. I think we both made mistakes." She smiled, a small, sad smile. "Maybe we did, but I'm glad you found happiness, Mason. You deserve it." I walked away from that encounter with a sense of closure I hadn't expected. I had spent so long hating her, resenting her, blaming her for everything that had gone wrong. But in that moment, I realized that holding onto that anger was like drinking poison and expecting her to die. It was time to let go. It was time to forgive. Not for her, but for myself. Now, years later, I sit in my home with Emma, our 2 dogs, and a life that is fuller than I ever imagined. We have a house in the suburbs, a white picket fence, and a garden that Emma tends to with the kind of love and care that I admire every single day. We're thinking about having kids, about building a family, about creating a future that is ours. I still think about the past sometimes. I think about Mark and Chloe, about the betrayal, about the pain. But it doesn't hurt anymore. It's just a memory, faded and distant, like a scar that has healed enough to be a part of my story without defining it. I learned a lot from that experience. I learned that trust is fragile, that loyalty is rare, and that the people you love can hurt you in ways you never imagined. But I also learned that you can survive anything, that you can pick up the pieces and build something beautiful out of the wreckage, that you can learn to love again, to trust again, to hope again. I'm not the same person I was before everything happened. I'm more cautious, more aware, more grateful for the good things in my life. I don't take anything for granted anymore. I don't assume that the people I love will always be there. I work at my relationships, I show up, I listen. I try to be the person that Emma deserves, the person I should have been all along. And when I look back at that day, the day I walked into my apartment and found my girlfriend and my best friend together, I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel sadness. I feel gratitude. Because without that moment, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have Emma. I wouldn't have this life. I wouldn't have become the person I am today. Trying something new completely transformed my life. It forced me to grow, to change, to become someone I could be proud of. It taught me that sometimes the worst things in life lead to the best things. And it taught me that even when everything falls apart, even when the people you love betray you, even when the world feels like it's ending, there is always hope. There is always a chance to start over, to build something new, to find happiness again. You just have to be brave enough to take the first step.
কার বাসরে ঘুমাও তুমি, কার নিয়ে চলো, আমায় রেখে কেন প্রিয়া গিয়াছ রে বলো। কার বাসরে ঘুমাও তুমি, কার নিয়ে চলো, আমায় রেখে কেন প্রিয়া গিয়াছ রে বলো। কার মনেতে তোমার আশা রাখো জমা করে, আমার আশা পুইরা দিয়া তুমি রইলা।